Flashy Flash might have just become God's next ultra-powerful avatar in Chapter 201 of One Punch Man. In this chapter, we also get to see Empty Void in action for the very first time. And we end with a major cliffhanger that sees God return once again. This is the first chapter in a while that's actually longer than 13-14 pages. And man, am I so happy that it is, because so much happens in this chapter, and so many interesting details regarding Empty Void's powers and plans. Definitely plenty to talk about in this chapter, so let's just jump right into it. So you guys probably didn't forget this, but in case you did, last chapter we ended with one of the most insane and honestly gruesome villain entrances that we've seen in One Punch Man in probably ever, as we saw that the Heavenly Ninja Party suddenly started to convulse and bleed out of every orifice heavily, when suddenly all of their innards burst out of their bodies to form the body of Empty Void. And we left off in that chapter with Empty Void facing off against Flashy Flash and Sonic. Well, thankfully the only interruption between last chapter and all the action that happens in this chapter is this awesome cover page by Murata. Simple yet very clean. Spoiler, Saitama isn't in this chapter at all, but it's still nice to have him on a cover. So yeah, I enjoyed that, but let's move on. So the chapter kicks off with Flashy Flash and Sonic looking on at Evil Void as he approaches them. Sonic recognizes him as the one that was in that incubation chamber back when we saw that flashback of Flashy Flash and Sonic stumbling across him as he was recovering, and you'd assume that they'd be pretty spooked out after seeing like straight up entrails forming this man's body, but Flashy Flash doesn't seem fazed at all, and we're about to see why. He says, "Slurping up the blood and guts of your village's students as an entrance, that totally fits you, Empty Void. It's not just perverse, it's plain revolting." And we finally hear Empty Void talk here as he says, "So you know my name, Flash. I can see you got in touch with Blast. How is that bastard doing? I was just about to eat his entrails too." But it seems that Flashy Flash is not intimidated at all, because he rushes in instantly and starts throwing slashes at Empty Void as he dodges them. That's when we see that Flashy Flash looks at the remains of all the Heavenly Ninja Party members that apparently had their entrails used to make his body, but then we see that this was all actually a ruse. Mid-fight, Flashy Flash explains, "Don't be shocked, Sonic, this guy is a genjutsu user. If he could really do what we just saw, there'd be no reason for him not to instantly kill us the same way." And to be honest, I didn't really think about that. That makes perfect sense. If he could just pull people's entrails out of their bodies, then why wouldn't he just do it to Flashy Flash and Sonic as soon as he saw them? Except for obviously plot convenience. But this explains it. And for those of you that don't know what genjutsu is, if you're familiar with Naruto, it's pretty much casting illusions. It's a ninja skill where the user casts illusions on their target, and apparently that's a thing in the One Punch Man world as well, which I think is pretty cool. Well, of course Sonic fell for the ruse, because he had the shocked look on his face that I'm pretty sure we all did when we first saw it happen. But you know, Sonic being Sonic, he tries to play it off like he saw through it from the very beginning, and he tells Empty Void, "You think you can fool Speed of Sound Sonic's eyes with such silly tricks, you lowlife?" And after this, Empty Void points out that he's been analyzing their fighting style, and that it's only a slight variation of what they learned from the Ninja Village, in a way kind of distinguishing Flashy Flash as an individual. Empty Void seems to be impressed with what he saw from Flashy Flash, because he then says, "You pass." This is when we get this insane panel of him opening his mouth, and inside of it you see these like galaxies and stars, much like you saw on Garo's body when he took his Cosmic Fear form, and out of nowhere he pulls out a God Cube. And considering we learned a few chapters back that Empty Void has the ability to open a gate that leads directly to the dimension where God is laying dormant, it seems like his body itself might be the gateway into that dimension. I originally thought that it was one of the swords that he had on his back, and that still might be the case, but for now I'm kind of leaning towards his body being the one that could actually open the gate itself. But anyway, Flashy Flash and Sonic recognize the cube right away, because it's the same one that they saw when they first discovered that man. And it seems that Empty Void is only interested in Flashy Flash and calls Sonic insignificant, likely assuming that Flashy Flash has the most potential because he's shown the most potential. Well, the fact that Empty Void is trying to analyze and judge their power really pisses Flashy off, and he tells Empty Void that he's gonna get every bit of information out of him as he possibly can before he gets forfeited. And obviously what Flashy Flash is referring to here is that he's assuming that Empty Void is eventually gonna meet the same fate as Homeless Emperor, and as soon as God is done with him, he's just gonna vaporize him in the same way that he did to Homeless Emperor. So before that happens, he wants to get as much information about God as he possibly can, which I think is a pretty smart move, to be honest, because it always seems like we're getting too little too late when it comes to getting information about God. Well, Flashy Flash turns up the heat and continues to attack Empty Void, and Sonic's just looking on at the stream of all these after images from their clashes, at a loss for words at how fast they're moving, which of course is another reminder to Sonic how far behind Flashy Flash he really is. And I think that's going to come back into play at some point, or like at the end of this arc or something, because it's probably going to give Sonic some newfound motivation to get even stronger. I do think they're eventually going to be on the same playing field. I don't think Flashy Flash is always going to be like way stronger than Sonic is, or else the rivalry wouldn't wouldn't really be that fun, would it? Well, as Flashy Flash is fighting Empty Void, we find out that he's been doing so with his eyes closed the entire time. This is because, as he states, I excel at combat in the dark, where I can rely on just my senses. On someone like me, Genjutsu tricks are, and then he gets cut off, but what I'm assuming he's about to say here is that Genjutsu doesn't work on him because you need to see the illusions in order to fall for it, and his eyes are closed. Well, it seems that Empty Void was reading his mind or something, because he finishes his sentence by saying, not gonna work, you think? And then he says, we'll see about that. And literally out of nowhere, we see that Flashy Flash is surrounded by death punches. The same exact death punch that he was almost hit with by Saitama. This of course freaks Flashy the F out, because he thought it was impossible to fall under Genjutsu with his eyes closed, but then he realizes it's not just visual manipulation. The source is a psychic wave that finds the target's fear and then personifies it. So whether this is an ability that he got from God or something that he learned as a ninja, I find it really interesting that Empty Void is using Esper abilities here technically. Now, does that mean he was born as an Esper and became a ninja, or again, he was just given these Esper powers by God? We don't really know, and we're probably going to find that out at some point, but I found it very interesting that this is something that could even be possible. It seems that Empty Void might even have the potential to straight up read minds, which I mean, at that point, how are you even going to beat him? Well, as Flashy Flash is still startled from the death punches, he gets an even bigger shock when he gets something thrown in his hand by Empty Void. Flashy Flash looks on in horror as he seems to have Sonic's head in his hands being sliced in half. Of course, Flashy Flash is thrown completely off guard by this and is just frozen, so Empty Void takes the opportunity to grab the cube and shove it right in his face, essentially initiating the God power process, because if we remember when we first saw the God cubes with Flashy Flash and Saitama back in the underground base of the Monster Association, God explains that they have to put their hands on the cube first, and after God decides if they're worthy or not, that's when he'll either confiscate them or give them power. Sonic sees Flashy Flash getting touched by this cube and rushes to his aid, but Flashy Flash does the same thing to Sonic and seems to repel him with the cube somehow. Not sure if the cube has some kind of energy projection itself, or if that's just the effect that it has on people that aren't worthy or something. But then Empty Void says something pretty interesting after this. He says, Sonic, I heard this guy accepted a monster cell. Provoke their inferiority complex and they'll soon succumb to temptation and accept the power. That's out of the question. So of course he's referring to the time where Sonic ate a monster cell because he thought he was too weak and ended up not becoming a monster because he cooked it first. He must be bringing up the fact that Sonic ate a monster cell for some reason. Since he brought it up, it kind of now has to play some kind of part in this arc. So I'm not exactly sure when the fact that Sonic ate a monster cell is going to come back into play. But when he says that's out of the question, I'm not exactly sure what he means here. It might mean that even though he ate a monster cell, it's still out of the question to try and turn him into a monster. That's kind of what I'm getting from that. And it's also really interesting to point out that when Flashy Flash is explaining Empty Void's special form of Genjutsu, he explains it as him being able to make someone see their deepest fears. And for some reason for Sonic, that was seeing Saitama's death punches and also seeing the decapitated head of Sonic. So that tells us that he still very much cares about Sonic. Even though they haven't been together since they were kids at the Ninja Village, he still obviously sees him as a close friend. But more important than that, it seems that the fight between him and Saitama has really taken a toll on his mind, a lot more than we initially thought. Being as prideful as he is, we knew that him realizing the fact that Saitama's like way stronger than him was going to get to him somehow, but apparently it's like at the top of his list of his fears, which again I think is very interesting and I hope gets touched on some more as we go on. Well, it seems that Flashy Flash gets knocked out by the cube because we then see that he's waking up in some kind of dream sequence as he's a kid again, and as he's wondering where he is, he sees Sonic standing on top of a hill. He calls for Sonic and Sonic says, "You're finally awake, Flash. I'm glad I deserted the village with you. You finally made it here, the place of dreams we swore to." And this is when Flashy Flash is reminded of the plan that him and Sonic had back when they were kids and they wanted to start their own ninja village in this location. Flashy Flash doesn't seem to realize that this is all a dream, and in that same panel we see very clearly that the Sonic that he's looking at is obviously not Sonic but God himself trying to impersonate someone close to him. This is exactly what he tried to do with Garo and Tatsumaki, where he took the form of Bang and Blast. So this fake Sonic then says, "Even any nightmare is better than life in the village. Starting now, the two of us will build the ideal village right here. Let's do our best together, Flash." And Flashy Flash seems all in as he slowly reaches his hand towards him. We all know exactly what's going to happen the minute he touches his hand. That's an indication that he's going to accept God's power and he's going to become one of his avatars. Now, if I were to put money on it, I would say that Flashy Flash definitely does not touch his hand here. We're probably going to see in the next chapter that he either sees through the illusion, or Sonic or Saitama shows up to kind of break him out of it. But it's also really interesting to note that God has identified Flashy Flash as someone that's worthy of his power, really showing just how strong he is compared to other heroes. I don't know about you guys, but it was definitely a breath of fresh air to finally get a longer chapter after so long. After all the 12, 13, 14 page chapters, I was ready ready for a nice beefy one. And we got it here, and I could not be happier with the content itself. But let me know what you guys think about this chapter in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Definitely share your thoughts below. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you feel like it. That is it for this one though. Have an absolutely wonderful night, afternoon, evening, whatever, and I'll see you guys in the next video.